So we're back out here in the field today for the second episode of the 2026 Read Your Crop Stories series. You can see from the crop behind me here that things are taking off. We're at 600 GDDs ballpark, so we're V6, V7 at least on some of the crops here. And we're ready to move into that rapid growth phase, but it's a great time to do a few different things if you're scouting or if you're trying to figure out where some of the things are working in your program. We're going to talk about a few of those tests and trials and things that you might think about doing just to monitor how your crop's doing, whether it's for this season or for future reference. So tag along. We're going to get some pictures and videos. We'll incorporate those when we get back to the office. The corn's getting enough size to it now that flags are getting hard to see, especially ones out in the field. And it's pretty easy to lose your way when you're trying to find plots that you've got. So I set a flag at the edge of the field, and then I just take a plant, maybe two out of each row, going across the end rows to create a pathway for me to find my area every time I go back to the field. It makes life so much easier. As the plants grow, we know that we lose a lot of the leaves on the lower portion. In fact, on this plant that's at V7, you can see that this initial leaf, the thumb leaf at the bottom, is already pretty much gone. So if you don't get in here about this time to do your counts, it's difficult to know really where you're at in staging your crop in the vegetative cycle. So what I do is I come up about 6 leaves and I put a zip tie around that stalk loosely. And that way I can go into this field at any point and know exactly where I'm at without having to cut a plant or guess at how many leaves I lost off of the bottom. Those are just a couple of quick tips that I like to share with the clients that I work with who are doing regular, consistent scouting in the same places their field throughout the year to better understand their crops and become more of that expert on their farm. The other things we like to talk about is how can we check the effectiveness of different treatments we may be doing or try to figure out what things our crop may need. And we start with some of that with doing tissue or possibly sap testing, depending on how a person wants to approach it. And just as a general rule for me, I don't think a person needs to jump into weekly testing right off the bat unless you're really sure you've got the time to commit to that. So many of my clients start at somewhere in this 5 to 600 GDD range. We'll pull the first uh, leaf sample and send that in for analysis to check and see what are our nutrient levels looking like. After this point, I also typically will look at somewhere in that 1200 GDD range, somewhere just before pollination, see how things are looking in that rapid growth phase as we get toward the reproductive phase. And then somewhere probably in the 1800 GDD range, somewhere after pollination as we're getting into grain fill, maybe pulling another sample there. So those are just kind of stair step places that I think are good places to start if you're wanting to do some leaf analysis on your plants. The other thing that we recommend is, as David Hewlett spoke at our meetings the last couple of years, he talked a lot about how our nutrient levels in our soils may not be as consistent throughout the season as we think they would be. So his recommendation is to pull samples throughout the season as well. So for my guys that I work with in my scouting program, I recommend pulling a soil probe at each plant where you're pulling a leaf. And that way we can correlate, we can go back and look what do the nutrient levels look like in the soil and correlate that possibly to what our tissue samples are telling us or sap samples, whichever one you may be using. But to me, that's a good program to implement just to start seeing are there places in my program that we might have some gaps to try to fill. Checking the bricks level in our plants has become a topic in the industry of the last couple of years as well. And understanding what bricks is in relationship to sugar production in our plant The photosynthesis that's happening and how many building blocks our plant is producing are really what the bricks test is all about. And it's a pretty simple test to do. I've kind of got things set up here to give you a quick video of it. I have a digital bricks meter. I take a portion of the leaf off of the corn plant and put it into a garlic press. I'll then squeeze some of the sap from the leaf into the unit, into the eye. It does take a bit of force. Sometimes it can be quite a challenge to get the sap out of it. This one it wasn't too bad, but you simply squeeze a few drops of the sap into the eye, and then we'll close the top on this and push the button, and it will give us the digital readout on what the bricks level is. And it's one of those tools I've started to use a little bit more. It can give us an indication of how healthy our plants are. There's a lot of discussion about how if we can improve the bricks levels in our plants are less susceptible to insect and disease pressure. And it's also just an indicator of how many sugars our plant is creating for those building blocks, whether it be for building the plants, the roots, or the grain at the end of the season. Those are a few of the tools and tricks and things that we're doing within the Big Picture Ag Scouting program. If that seems like something that's of interest to you, would love to talk with you a little bit more, help you get started with the scouting program so that you can spend a little more time in your field and better understand what's going on with your crops, all with the objective of helping you be your farm's expert. So with that, we're going to call it a wrap for the today, and we will look forward to catching back up with you again in a couple weeks. Obviously, our crop's going to have a lot more size in 2 weeks, and we'll start looking at some of those other signs and signals of how our crop is faring through the season as we go.